The security feed is grainy, but the terror is crystal clear. 4 armed men storm the gala. Every trained bodyguard in the building, the men paid to die for the Park family, scatters. The guests are already trampling each other to reach the exits. Then there's her. A woman in a rumpled caretaker's uniform plants her feet between the gunmen and a terrified old woman. She has no weapon, no backup, no reason to stay. She stays anyway. Park Do-Jin, the man who owns this city, sits in his dark office staring at the monitor. His whiskey glass is shattered on the floor. He made a drunken, arrogant vow 3 weeks ago. He would marry the first person brave enough to stand their ground when everything fell apart. He made it as a joke. He made it because he believed that person didn't exist. He was wrong. And now the most feared man in Seoul is sitting in the dark, watching a hotel caretaker do what none of his soldiers could. And he cannot explain why his hands won't stop shaking. What do you do when fate takes a drunken vow seriously, and the woman it chose is the last person your world would ever accept? The whiskey in Park Do-Jin's glass was amber, expensive, and untouched. The private lounge was thick with cigar smoke and the particular ease of men who feared nothing. They were the apex. They had built their empire on the understanding that weakness was something that happened to other people. Then someone laughed. A lieutenant, 2 drinks past careful, gestured toward Do-Jin with his glass. 41 years old, the man said. Runs the most feared syndicate in Korea. Still eating alone. The room chuckled. Do-Jin felt the eyes. He set his glass down. The sharp clink silenced the room instantly. I'll marry the first person with enough spine to stand their ground when everything falls apart, he said. His voice was flat, certain, and completely unguarded in the way only a drunken truth can be. Not run. Stay. Laughter erupted. Someone slapped the table. The standard was impossible. Everyone in that room ran when the fire started. Everyone had a price or a survival instinct that overruled principle. Do-Jin smiled, cold-eyed, and let them laugh. He believed it too. 5 miles away, the fluorescent lights of the Grand Latte Hotel buzzed over Amara Okoye. She was invisible. She had mastered it, the specific invisibility of a large black woman in a service uniform in a luxury hotel. She moved efficiently, anticipated needs before they were spoken, and kept her eyes down. Not from shame, from strategy. Being unseen kept the shift moving. Being seen meant friction. Her feet ached. Her back ached worse. She wiped a fingerprint from a gold-plated surface as a group of guests walked past without registering her existence. She didn't mind. She had her mother's rent due in Lagos in 10 days. She had a sister's school fees to cover. She had exactly one goal for tonight: finish the shift, get paid, go home. Her radio crackled. Her supervisor's voice, flat and distracted. Amara, penthouse. The elderly guest is asking for you specifically. She nodded at no one and headed for the elevator. Mrs. Park was small against the enormous bed, wrapped in a silk robe that cost more than Amara's monthly wage. She was sharp-tongued, aristocratic, and profoundly lonely. The particular loneliness of a woman whose son sent money and security, but not himself. She looked up when Amara entered. Something visibly relaxed in her face. You're late, Mrs. Park said. You told me yesterday that I hover, Amara replied, adjusting the pillow. The old woman almost smiled. I changed my mind. They settled into the quiet comfort of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms. Amara poured tea. Mrs. Park watched her with something careful in her eyes. You remind me of someone very brave, the old woman said softly. Amara laughed, low and tired. I'm just a hotel maid, Mrs. Park. That's what brave people always say, Mrs. Park replied. Amara didn't answer. She straightened the tray and moved toward the door, already thinking about the next task. She didn't know this woman's last name. She didn't need to. The woman was lonely, and loneliness, Amara understood completely. She didn't know that 3 floors below, a new catering crew was unloading supply crates, and the men carrying them had hands that had never once held a serving tray. The ballroom setup was controlled chaos, flowers, crystal, the precise engineering of luxury. Amara moved through it with her tray, reading the room the way she always did. Who needed water? Who needed space? Who was about to drop something? It was the low-level constant attention of someone paid to anticipate. That was when she saw them. The new catering crew near the service entrance. 6 men unloading silver crates from a panel van. She paused. Their hands were wrong. She had worked in hotels for 7 years. She knew what kitchen hands looked like, nicked, damp, moving with the loose ease of people who handled equipment all day. These men's hands were calloused differently. Thick across the knuckles. Gripping the crates the way you gripped something you didn't want to drop on your foot. Tense, controlled, aware. The hands of men trained to hold something much heavier than catering supplies. Their shoulders were wrong too. Too square. Too still between movements. Amara put her tray down and walked to find her supervisor. Mr. Kim was red-faced near the elevators, shouting about a linen delivery. Mr. Kim. She kept her voice low and even. The new catering crew by the service entrance. Have you personally verified them? He turned. The expression on his face told her everything before he spoke. Amara. Their hands, she said. Look at their hands. They aren't kitchen workers. They move like. I don't have time for this, he snapped. We are 40 minutes behind, and I have a senator's table still unset. Get back on the floor. He walked away without looking toward the service entrance once. Amara stood in the corridor. She looked back at the men. One of them glanced up and caught her watching. His expression didn't change. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away. That was not the reaction of a nervous caterer caught slacking. That was assessment. She went back to work. She kept her head down. She told herself she was wrong, that exhaustion was making her paranoid, that this wasn't her problem or her world. She didn't believe any of it. Across the city, Do-Jin stood at his office window reviewing security logistics for the dinner. His head of security, Sergeant Han, stood near the window, unnervingly still, the way a man is still when he is managing something internally he cannot show on his face. The intelligence on the Heian group feels constructed, Do-Jin said. Too clean. It reads like they want us to know they're coming. Perimeter is locked, Han said. Catering vetted. Everything is under control. Do-Jin looked at him. Something sat wrongly in the air between them, a frequency slightly off. He filed it away. He had to trust his inner circle. He had built everything on that principle. He turned back to the window. What he didn't do was read the bottom of the security report. The routine flag his team had dismissed as a visa irregularity. Foreign national. Unverified. New hire. Amara Okoye. The woman who had already noticed something was wrong was already inside the gate. And the man who should have been watching was looking in every direction except the right one. Downstairs, the catering crew finished unloading. One man checked his watch. 4 hours. The Grand Latte ballroom was gold and diamonds, and the particular collective blindness of the very wealthy at their leisure. Mrs. Park sat at the head table, composed and regal. Amara stood near a pillar, keeping watch the way she always did, visible enough to serve, invisible enough to be ignored. The catering men had spread across the room. She watched them move. They were taking positions, not pouring wine. The music stopped. A glass shattered. Then the world came apart. Gunfire punched through the air. The chandeliers swayed. The room became a single roar of screaming and broken crystal and silk dresses catching on upturned chairs. The bodyguards were pinned in seconds. The attackers had coordinated crossfire at both exits, engineered to neutralize the response before it started. Guests stampeded, trampling anything in their path. Waiters vanished through service doors. Every person with training, instinct, or a shred of self-preservation ran. Mrs. Park sat alone. 3 men in catering black moved toward her with pistols raised. Coordinated. Purposeful. This was not random terror. This was extraction. Amara stood 10 feet away. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her legs understood exactly what was happening and sent one clean, clear signal, move. The service door was 12 feet to her left. She had a straight line. She could be through it in 4 seconds. She stood there for 2 full seconds, making the decision. Then she walked toward the old woman. She stepped in front of Mrs. Park. She planted her feet on the polished marble floor. She spread her arms wide and stared at the 3 armed men with the particular expression of someone who has already done the calculation and accepted the result. "You're not touching her." It wasn't a hero's declaration. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a low, iron voice that had no performance in it at all. The men stopped. Not because she was threatening, because her absolute stillness in the center of a slaughter was genuinely disorienting. They were trained for resistance. They were not trained for this, a woman with no weapon and no tactical advantage who simply refused to acknowledge that she should be afraid of them. That pause lasted 40 seconds. It was the most important 40 seconds in the room. Do-Jin's backup team breached the double doors. The attackers broke. They scrambled into the smoke, abandoning the objective as the response team swarmed the ballroom. Mrs. Park was untouched, shaking in her chair. Amara's shoulder burned from a shove. Her lip was split. A security guard rushed to her. "Are you all right?" Amara looked at Mrs. Park. The old woman's eyes were glassy with shock, her hands trembling on the tablecloth. "Does she need more tea?" Amara said. Across the city, Do-Jin sat before a wall of monitors. He had watched the feed in real time, his men failing, the attackers moving, the room collapsing into chaos. He watched the caretaker step forward. He rewound it. He watched it again. His whiskey glass sat beside him, untouched and going warm. "Find out who she is," he said quietly. His voice didn't shake. Everything else in him did. He rewound it a 3rd time, then a 4th. He was still watching at 2 a.m. Do-Jin's men hit the hotel at dawn, expecting to find a hero waiting for her reward. They found a desk clerk who barely remembered her name. "Terminated," the manager said, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Liability concerns following the incident. Effective immediately." Do-Jin read the file in his office an hour later. He had expected hidden motive. A criminal connection. Some angle that would explain why she had done what trained soldiers wouldn't. The file was clean. Aggressively, impossibly clean. Amara Okoye, Nigerian national. 7 years of service roles across 3 hotels. References that used words like exceptional and invisible. The specific language of employers who relied on someone completely and never once thought about why. She wired 40% of her income to Lagos every month. No criminal record. No organizational ties. No outstanding debts. She had walked into a ballroom of armed men and stood her ground because a lonely old woman needed protecting. That was the complete file. Do-Jin gripped the paper until the edges bent. He had spent his entire career believing that people were comprehensible, that loyalty had a price, that kindness had a motive, that everything mapped onto something he could control. This woman had broken that entirely and walked away without knowing she'd done it. He didn't send a team. He drove himself to the Mapogu address, no security, no announcement. A young woman in pajamas answered the door and stared at his suit. "Amara?" She found another job. Community care facility in Yeongdongpo. Started this morning. He didn't answer. He turned and left. The care facility smelled of antiseptic and slow time. Do-Jin sat in the waiting area on a hard plastic chair. He was the only person in the room, wearing something that cost more than the furniture. The receptionist glanced at him twice and decided not to ask questions. He waited 40 minutes. He didn't check his phone. The doors opened. Amara walked out, uniform wrinkled, hair in a practical bun, eyes aimed at the exit. She was already somewhere else in her mind, already calculating the next task, the next shift, the next thing needed. She noticed the man in the expensive suit and sighed the particular sigh of someone whose shift has technically ended, but apparently hasn't. "Sir," she said, patient and tired. "Visiting hours ended at 5. Do-Jin stood. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time without a monitor between them. The eyes that had stared down armed men were exactly the same in a fluorescent-lit corridor. Steady. Present. Completely unbothered by his presence. "I'm not here to visit anyone," he said. He stepped toward her. "I'm here for you." Amara looked at him the way someone looks at a sentence that doesn't parse. "I don't know you," she said. "Park Do-Jin." He waited for what always happened when he said that name. The stillness, the recalibration, the visible shift in how someone held their body. She looked at him. Then, "Is Mrs. Park all right?" That was all. No reaction to the name. No angle. Just the old woman. Do-Jin couldn't speak for a full 3 seconds. Mini cliffhanger, he had come to save her. Standing in a beige corridor under fluorescent lights, he understood for the first time that she was the one who was going to save him. Amara didn't ask for a reward. She accepted the position at the estate because Mrs. Park asked her directly, and because the old woman's loneliness was the kind Amara recognized from the inside. Life in the estate was ordered, quiet, and faintly suffocating. She was efficient and invisible, the same way she had always been. She learned the household rhythms. She learned which staff to trust, and which ones watched her with the particular tightness of people who hadn't decided yet what she was. The difference from every other job was Do-Jin. He was always there. He sat in the study reviewing documents when she passed. He stood in the garden taking calls when she walked Mrs. Park after lunch. He appeared in corridors she was moving through with a frequency that exceeded coincidence by a significant margin. He didn't hover. He just watched, the focused, searching attention of a man trying to solve something with insufficient data. It was, Amara thought, the most intense she had ever been stared at by someone who never said anything. Sergeant Han noticed everything. He moved through the estate with the ease of a man who had been there long enough to own the corners. 11 years beside Do-Jin. He knew every shift in the boss's jaw, every tell in his posture. He could read Do-Jin the way some men read weather. What he saw concerned him. One afternoon, Han passed Amara in the library. He didn't look at her directly. He moved slowly along the bookshelf, his hand trailing the spines, his voice barely above a murmur. "You don't belong in this world, Miss Okoye." He didn't stop walking. He didn't wait for a response. He was gone before the sentence fully landed. Amara kept reading aloud to Mrs. Park. She felt the cold of his voice settle in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She had faced men with guns in a ballroom. She wasn't afraid of a man in a suit. But she noted it. She noted everything. The garden at dusk was the only place in the estate that felt like breathing. Amara sat on the stone bench after Mrs. Park had retired, listening to the city hum beyond the walls. Footsteps on the gravel. She didn't need to look. Do-Jin sat beside her, leaving careful distance. "My mother likes you," he said. "She just needed someone to listen," Amara replied. "Nobody in this house listens," he said. "Everyone is too busy trying to be heard." She looked at the shadows stretching across the lawn. "Word travels in this house," she said. He went still. "The vow," she continued. Her voice was even careful, honest. "The promise you made to your men." She turned and looked at him directly. "Did you mean it?" The garden held the silence between them. The city hummed. A light went on in an upstairs window. Do-Jin stared into the dark. He couldn't lie. He couldn't speak the whole truth yet. He said nothing. That was his answer. In the estate hallway, Han stood in the shadow of the doorframe. He had heard every word. His expression didn't change. He turned and walked quietly back toward his office. The folder landed on Do-Jin's desk at 10 in the morning. He read it twice. Then he set it down and sat very still for a long time. The Heian attack had required insider knowledge, venue codes, table positions, the exact guard rotation at the birthday dinner. That level of precision didn't come from surveillance. It came from someone in the room. The investigator had followed the money for 3 weeks. The trail ended at a single name. Sergeant Han. Do-Jin had known Han for 22 years. Han had stood at his shoulder through everything. The consolidations, the wars, the 3 attempts on Do-Jin's life. He had chosen Han deliberately, trusted him structurally, built the organization's inner architecture around his loyalty. None of that had been real. Han had been positioning himself for a succession move for over a year. He needed Do-Jin weakened publicly, the family threatened, and the organization's confidence in its leader shaken. The birthday dinner was supposed to be the fracture point, a high-profile failure that would cost Do-Jin the council's faith and open the path for a restructure. But the attack had failed. Because of Amara. Do-Jin turned the page. His chest went cold. Han had moved quickly once the attack failed. He was feeding fabrications to the inner council, that Amara was connected to the Heian group directly, that her presence at the hotel was a plant, that her background contained anomalies his own team had manufactured. He was building a case to have her removed before the vow became a public organizational fact. Because the vow complicated everything. An outsider, a foreign national with no underworld standing, as the boss's chosen partner would disrupt every hierarchy Han had spent years carefully cultivating. She wasn't just a problem for his pride. She was a structural threat to his plan. Do-Jin closed the folder. He breathed through the particular cold fury of a man who has just learned he trusted the wrong person for 20 years. He could not move against Han immediately. If Han learned the investigation was complete, he would act before the trap closed, and the only thing in this house vulnerable enough to use was Amara. Do-Jin needed 48 hours he didn't have. He kept his face exactly as it always was. That afternoon, Han walked into the library. He was dressed precisely, his manner impeccably neutral. He moved through the room the way he always moved, like a man who owned every space he entered. He touched the books. He checked the windows. He asked Amara questions framed as routine security protocol that were nothing of the kind. How long had she worked in Seoul? Whether she had contact with anyone outside the estate. The details of her last employment. Each question was a needle. She answered everything without flinching. When Han finally left, Amara stared at the door for a long moment. She picked up her phone. She typed one line to Do-Jin. "Your lieutenant makes me uncomfortable." Across the city, in the middle of a council meeting, Do-Jin's phone vibrated on the table. He read the message. He didn't look at the men around him. He stood up and walked out without a word. Han received confirmation of his exit from the meeting within 4 minutes. He checked his watch. He was ahead of schedule. The order arrived at noon. 2 men in dark suits entered the library. Household staff didn't walk like that. Amara recognized the weight of institutional authority the second they appeared in the doorway. Amara Okoye once said, "You are being removed pending a formal security review. 2 hours to pack." Mrs. Park's teacup hit its saucer hard. She has done nothing. This is completely. The council's decision is final, the man said. He didn't look at Mrs. Park. Amara stood. She kept her face still. She had been told to leave before. She knew how to do it. The precise management of dignity required when the world decides you don't belong somewhere. Pack carefully. Say goodbye without making it bigger than it is. Walk out with your back straight. She kissed Mrs. Park's forehead. The old woman gripped her hand with both of hers and wouldn't let go for a moment. Amara gently unwound her fingers. "I'll be fine," she said quietly. She meant it. She had been fine before with less. She collected her single bag. She walked down the long marble corridor, the 2 men behind her, their footsteps a steady mechanical countdown. The estate felt vast and cold, the particular coldness of a beautiful place that had just decided to expel you. The front gate was ahead. The sun was blinding. Then the sound of an engine. Hard and fast. A black sedan tore through the perimeter road and skidded sideways across the gravel, blocking the gate entirely. The door swung open before the car had fully stopped. Do-Jin stepped out. No jacket. Shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like a man who had crossed the city in less time than it should have taken, which he had. He walked past the gate security without looking at them. He stopped in front of Amara. He looked at her bag. One bag. Everything she'd brought already packed because she hadn't argued, because that was who she was, someone who absorbed what the world did to her without falling apart. His jaw tightened. He turned to the 2 men behind her. The silence lasted 10 seconds. It was the kind of silence that precedes a decision that cannot be undone. "Put her bag back in her room," he said. His voice was quiet. Completely quiet. The man who had given the removal order stepped forward carefully. "The council ordered." "I know what the council ordered." Do-Jin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I am countermanding it. Put her bag back. The guards looked at each other. They looked at Do-Jin. They put the bag down and stepped back. Amara looked up at him. She was exhausted. She was hurt in the particular way of someone who expected something and received proof they were right not to. But she was steady. You know this isn't over, she said. I know. Why? She asked. She wasn't asking about the council. She was asking something larger. Because you didn't run, he said. And I'm not going to either. A mile away, Sergeant Han read the report on his phone. His face didn't change. We accelerate, he said into the receiver. He set his phone down and pulled out a second one, a number he had kept for exactly this contingency. Do-Jin had 40 minutes. Han's final move was already in motion. A coordinated strike on the estate, timed for midnight, designed to look like a Heian retaliation. If it landed, Han would have both the crisis and the succession narrative he needed. Do-Jin didn't go to his armory. He made 4 phone calls. The inner council met in the estate's private room within the hour. Do-Jin laid the evidence on the table without preamble: bank transfers, encrypted communications, the fabricated security reports about Amara, the financial trail from the birthday dinner back to Han's accounts. He didn't perform it. He presented it the way a man presents something he has been carrying for weeks and is finally setting down. The room was absolutely silent. 2 council members stared at the documents without looking up. They weren't shocked by Han's betrayal. Men who had spent their lives in this world were rarely shocked by betrayal. They were calculating, running the numbers on what it meant to support a boss who had just chosen an outsider over organizational custom. One of them finally spoke. If you move against Han, the succession structure fractures. The organization fractured the night Han sold the birthday dinner to our enemies, Do-Jin said. His voice was iron. What I am deciding now is what we become after. The silence returned. Then 2 men stood up. They bowed, cold, formal, final. They walked out. Their resignation required no words. The door closing behind them was enough. The remaining 2 stayed. Han was taken into custody within the hour by Do-Jin's most loyal men. His strike team was intercepted before it reached the estate perimeter. The coup dissolved without a single shot fired, the way things collapse when the ground beneath them is already gone. The house went quiet in the way houses go quiet after something enormous has passed through them. Do-Jin found the kitchen at 2 a.m. by following the light. Amara was at the small wooden table, hands around a mug, staring at nothing. She looked up when he entered. She looked at his face and read it the way she read rooms, quickly, accurately, without being told what she was seeing. Is it over? She asked. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The full weight of the night settled over them both. The dangerous part, he said. She waited. She had learned that he spoke when he was ready and not before. He looked at her across the table, not as a symbol, not as a vow, not as a problem to be solved. Just a woman sitting in a kitchen at 2 a.m. who had been through more in 6 weeks than most people navigate in a decade, and who was still sitting upright. He took a breath. There's something else, he said. Something I need to tell you. All of it. Amara set the kettle down. The kitchen felt very small suddenly. Very honest. Tell me, she said. He didn't reach for his phone or a folder or anything that could create distance. He just looked at her and began. He told her everything. The lounge, the liquor, the reckless, arrogant vow, and the laughter that followed. The security footage and the nights he had sat alone watching it, trying to understand why a stranger's 40 seconds of stillness had unsettled something foundational in him. Han's betrayal. The moment he realized she was the target. Every decision since. He held nothing back. No pride. No architecture of power between them. Amara listened. She had the quality of someone who could hold another person's honesty without flinching. She had learned it in years of sitting with lonely people in expensive rooms, hearing things they couldn't say to anyone else. When he finished, the kitchen held the quiet. You watched me on a screen for weeks, she said. And you still came. Yes. She looked at her hands on the table. 7 years of service work had left their marks on them. Fine lines, a small scar across one knuckle, the particular tiredness of hands that had never stopped working. "Do you know how many times I have been in a room full of important people and been invisible?" she said. "I know. You know because you watched me on a monitor." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held something that cost her. "That is not the same as seeing me." The truth sat between them, honest and uncomfortable. "If you hadn't made that vow," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "No joke. No footage. No fate nudging things into place. Would you have come to find me?" Do-Jin was quiet. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to give her the clean, certain answer that would close the distance between them. He couldn't. Not tonight. Not to her. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know who I was before I watched that footage. I know he was hollow in ways I had stopped noticing." He looked at her, not with the intensity of a man who owns things, but with the open uncertainty of a man who knows what he almost missed. "I know who I am now, and I am asking you, not because of a vow, not because of a dare, because of you." The kitchen light buzzed softly overhead. Do-Jin didn't have a ring. He didn't have a prepared speech or a carefully engineered moment. He had the truth, which was all he'd had since he walked into a care facility waiting room and sat in a plastic chair for 40 minutes. Amara looked at him for a long time. She saw a man who had told her honestly that he didn't know, and asked anyway. She understood that. She had spent her whole life making the best choice she could with incomplete information, deciding before the outcome was guaranteed. She smiled, slowly and fully, and for the first time since she arrived in this house, without managing it. "Yes," she said. One word. In that kitchen, at that hour, it sounded like everything. From the hallway came a small, muffled sound. Mrs. Park stood in the shadows, handkerchief pressed to her lips, quietly weeping. Neither of them was surprised. They married on a Tuesday. No gala. No press release. A small ceremony, Mrs. Park, 2 loyal men, and a 45-minute video call to Lagos where Amara's mother wept continuously and her younger brother demanded to speak to Do-Jin personally and asked him 3 pointed questions that Do-Jin answered without flinching. The organization adjusted. 2 council members had gone. Others stayed. Organizations recalibrate around honest leadership the same way they recalibrate around corrupt leadership, slowly, then all at once. Mrs. Park lived 4 more years. Good years, filled with tea and argument and a daughter-in-law who never once treated her like an obligation. In the hallway near the kitchen, a small frame hung on the wall. A still from the security footage. Unobtrusive, the kind of thing you'd notice only if you were looking for it. Amara walked past it every day and never asked him to take it down. She understood why it was there. It marked the moment he learned the difference between watching someone and seeing them. Those are not the same thing. He had needed to learn it the hard way, and he had, and it had changed everything. He had made a vow out of arrogance. He had kept it out of recognition. He had meant it, in the end, out of love. 3 different things. He had needed all 3 to get there. She hadn't run. And because she stayed, he finally became someone worth staying for.